This episode is sponsored by
What's up, homie?
Oh, hi, Mark.
I never thought the moment would come, but I have reached a new milestone in the YouTube world. Over this last month, Mark 1 Photography has already reached 50 subscribers and over 1,000 views. I have received my 50 subscriber YouTube plaque made out of brick, and I'm getting ready to quit my day job. So like and subscribe for more quality content.
Seriously, do it. Do it. Do it.
Anyway,
When you think of common prime lens focal lengths, what comes to mind? 24, 28, 35, 50, 85, 135 are likely some of the choices you might have thought of. Well, in September, the established Chinese lens manufacturer TTArtisan
China.
decided to grace us with not one, but two 75mm lenses for full frame. The 75mm f2 for Sony E and Nikon Z, and the 75mm f1.5 for the legacy m42 mount. How weird is that?
I am from Holland. Isn't that weird?
While not very popular in modern times, there are several 75mm lenses available on the market today. For full frame, we have the Meyer Optic Gorlitz 75 f1.5, the Cosina Voigtlander 75 f1.5 as well, the Samyang 75 f1.8, the ultra-affordable Leica 75mm f2 Apos Omicron, and the newly announced Thypoc Chimera 75mm f1.4. Actually, while I was recording this, Voigtlander announced yet another 75mm lens at f1.8 this time. So screw what I said, 75mm is the most popular focal length ever. For APS-C, we have the Viltrox 75 1.2, the Shure 75 1.2 as well, and for Micro Four Thirds, we have the Olympus or OM system 75mm f1.8. It turns out there's quite a bit of history behind the 75mm focal length. Perhaps the most famous of its kind is the Zeiss Jena Biotar 75mm f1.5, which was introduced as early as 1939. It was well known for its ability to produce incredibly shallow depth of field and swirly bokeh, meaning that the autofocus background looks as if it's turning into a vortex. This effect can clearly be seen in many sample images on Flickr, blogs, etc. You can still find copies of this lens on eBay for several mounts, for the affordable price of
Holy shit.
Just a note up front, this isn't really going to be a versus video. There is no winner here. Despite both being 75mm lenses, they are wildly different. However, we're going to see how both perform on a Sony a7C II full-frame camera with a 33 megapixel sensor. Let's start with the f2 AF. The lens has a solid metal build. Obviously at the mount you'll find the electronic contacts, while almost half of the body is dominated by the manual focus ring. The front filter size is 62mm. I highly appreciate the clicked aperture ring, which you don't often find for AF lenses in this price bracket. Other than these controls, there's nothing else, i.e. no AF/MF switch, which means that you'll have to control this on the camera itself. One kind of unacceptable flaw in my opinion is that the base of the hood does not have enough clearance for filters that are knurled, so you really need to push the hood to get it past the filter, which inevitably will cause some wear to the hood. Hence, I'm never going to take the hood off, which negates any benefit of it being reversible for storage. It seems they didn't really think this through, which is a shame. I do like that the hood has a squarish shape though. Square hoods are tight.
Up next, we have the arch.
The arch. The
And
arch.
you guessed it.
The arch.
It goes in the square hole.
original Sony E-lens caps don't fit the mount snugly, so they are pretty loose. Best to use the lens cap that comes with the lens. Also a minor inconvenience. However, note that the stock lens cap is not a simple cap. Rather, it is a smart cap with a USB-C port that allows you to upgrade the lens firmware. This is a genius design if you ask me, and I'd much rather have a smart cap as opposed to a USB port on the lens body, which can be a dust magnet. The lens on its own weighs around 360 grams, whereas mounted on a portable body like the A7C II, you'll get around a kilo. So to recap, on the plus side, the body construction is great, the aperture ring is much appreciated, and the smart rear cap is awesome. On the minus side, hood fit is a bummer. The 75mm f1.5 is a solid hunk of metal and glass. It has a bulbous shape contrary to the Biotar it is based on, and it comes in the m42 screw mount. On the one hand, m42 is adaptable to all mirrorless mounts and even some DSLR mounts. On the other hand, I kinda hate it because it's not uncommon to accidentally unscrew the lens while rotating the focus ring. I much prefer bayonet mounts in this respect. Also, with adapters you may end up with the aperture markings in a random direction, like in my case, facing downward. The aperture ring is close to the front element. The focus ring has quite a big throw and is a bit stiff to rotate, at least on my copy. I find the reverse focus direction annoying, i.e., you have to rotate anti-clockwise to focus further away. The lens is externally focusing, meaning that it extends or contracts as you adjust focus. It takes 58mm filters. It has a pretty high aperture blade count, specifically 13. This suggests that it has been designed to maintain roundness of the bokeh even if you stop down. It's got a metal rear cap, which I'm not a fan of. I much prefer plastic for caps. The front cap is a screw-on metal cap. I hate screw-on metal caps with a passion. I wouldn't bother with it, just get an aftermarket 58mm snap-on cap. The lens on its own weighs in at about 600 grams. Attaching an adapter takes this to about 730, while mounting it on the camera amounts to a total of 1 kilo 300 grams. Overall, with regards to ergonomics, there are a lot of impracticalities, but I'm willing to disregard them all if it delivers in character. Before I bore you to death with my lifeless narration, here are some image samples from these two lenses so that you can get an idea of what to expect. Now there's no surprise that the f2 destroys the f1.5 in autofocus, mainly because the f1.5 has no autofocus. As mentioned before, the f1.5 has a bit of a stiff focus ring, and rotating counterclockwise to focus further away really grinds my gears. Make sure that you're either well versed in manual focus or that you're using your camera's manual focus assist to your benefit, or both.
I certainly hope you know what you're doing.
The f2 has very snappy and accurate autofocus. Sony's class-leading IAF works perfectly with it. I cannot tell any difference from first-party glass with regard to AF responsiveness and accuracy. So, great job from TTArtisan in the AF department. The f2 is reported as having a minimum focus distance of 75 cm and a reproduction ratio of 0.13. This is not very close, so don't expect to do much detail work with it. On the plus side, the IQ wide open at minimum focus distance is respectable. The f1.5 is reported as having an MFD of 75 cm as well, and an RR of 0.11. Why it would have a smaller RR given the same MFD is beyond me. Wide open, the IQ is very soft, but this is to be expected as the lens is very soft in general. To summarize, neither of these lenses can really serve as a macro or semi-macro. In practice, the f1.5 appears to be focusing slightly closer, but the difference in magnification is negligible. On the whole, don't expect these lenses to have much utility for close-ups and detail shots. For evaluating the performance wide open, I took both lenses with me for a short portrait shoot with my friend Zoe. The f2 is a perfectly fine portrait workhorse. With IAF and tracking, you can just have the camera do the work and focus, pun intended, on the creative process. I don't think I had one autofocus image in the whole set. The sharpness at the pixel level is solid, but not spectacular like pro lenses such as f2.8 zooms or an 85 f1.4, but for all intents and purposes, it's totally usable. I find the bokeh very pleasing. Overall, top marks for a lens that, don't forget, costs around 200 euros. On the other hand, the f1.5 has a really poor sharpness wide open. This also makes judging focus with focus picking very hard because there is not enough contrast on edges for the FP system to pick up on. Expect to have a pretty poor hit ratio and having to redo shots several times, especially if you are talentless like myself. If you like the soft focus look, this might actually be something you will appreciate, because it will be reminiscent of old imperfect lenses. Otherwise, you will most likely need to stop the lens down to f2.8 or f4 or sharpen in post using something like Topaz Sharpen. The major selling point is the swirly character of the autofocus highlights. The swirliness comes from the fact that bokeh on the edges is not circular but oval, which gives the impression that it is rotating around the center of the image. To take advantage of the swirly character, you'll need to leave enough room around your subject for background to be visible. Ideal backgrounds can be city lights, foliage, etc. Comparing results side by side, it is evident that the more modern optical formula in the f2 yields substantially better image quality. Plus, the convenience of autofocus cannot be overstated. However, the f2 bokeh, though nice, is pretty standard, while the f1.5 has the swirly character going for it, so you'll need to figure out what your priorities are.
Time to choose.
During edit, it occurred to me that the portrait pics did not fully illustrate the swirliness potential of the f1.5. This is mainly because I framed the shots a bit too tight to the subject. So I booked another shoot with this chill guy named Kevin. Being slightly smaller than Zoe, He obstructs less of the background so that you can see more swirly bokeh. Note that you'll almost always want to keep the subject at the middle third of the image because the edges are so soft that it's pointless to place something important there. I hope this gives a better idea of the bokeh rendering of this lens. It will definitely not be to everyone's taste. Some love it, others feel it gives a dizzying result. Let's see how stopping down affects the bokeh rendering and what happens to the IQ on the subject. As you can see, in this particular framing, the bokeh retains its swirly character up to more or less f2. After that, the autofocus ovals in the background become small enough to no longer convey a sense of rotation. At the same time, stopping down to f2 largely takes care of the smearing in the center of the image. Stopping down even further to f2.8, 4, 5.6, etc., the sharpness becomes really solid. However, I imagine you won't be getting this lens to stop it down that much, but it's nice to know that you can sacrifice a bit of bokeh-liciousness to get puncher IQ where it matters. The f2 is very decent wide open for landscapes as well, with good sharpness across the parts of the frame that are within the depth of field, and not much noticeable CA on contrasting edges. Stopping down to f8 makes everything within the expanded DOF very detailed. Small letters can easily be read and all the lines on the buildings are plenty sharp. I find this a very satisfactory performance, and I wouldn't hesitate to shoot landscapes with it. On the other hand, you can definitely tell though f1.5 was not made for sharpness across the frame wide open. At f1.5, only the center of the image has some semblance of detail. The IQ on the edges is very ghostly. Definitely unusable for landscape, unless you're going for this effect, though I don't know why you would. f8 is an entirely different story though. IQ becomes totally respectable with solid sharpness across the whole image. I was pleasantly surprised by this, not gonna lie. So, stop down, a decent landscape pick is very much in the cards with this lens as well. Word got out that the 75mm f1.5 had pretty decent coverage on Fujifilm GFX, so I thought I'd give it a try. Indeed, it seems to cover the 44x33 sensor with only a minimal amount of vignetting. I personally don't mind the vignetting as it kinda suits shallow DOF pics anyway. On GFX it works out to a 58mm f1.2, so almost an original Nikon Noct at a fraction of the price, but also with a fraction of the image quality. Since the field of view is expanded, there's actually more swirliness captured. In some pictures, the DOF is so shallow that it almost looks like a tilt lens. If you can disregard the technical flaws, this optic is fun to use on the GFX, perhaps even more so, given Fuji's superior focus assists. Unfortunately, I don't own any other 75mm full-frame AF prime lens, but I do have the Sony 85mm f1.8, which is close enough. This is a stellar lens and a great pairing with A7C styled bodies because it is quite small and light. Being longer and with slightly brighter maximum aperture, it's capable of slightly more autofocus backgrounds. If 85mm is a preferable focal length for you, you can't go wrong with the Sony. However, do note that at €500, it's 2.5 times the price of the TTArtisan, while it's definitely not 2.5 times better. Though note it's discounted almost every year at Black Friday, so keep an eye on it around that time of year. Note also that the Sony doesn't have an aperture ring, so if you prefer that tactile feeling, the TTArtisan will be the better choice. As for alternatives to the 75mm f1.5, there's the Meyer optic and Voigtlanders mentioned at the beginning, but they are significantly more expensive. However, there is a cheaper option. In fact, Zeiss designed multiple lenses with swirly bokeh, and the most famous one is perhaps the Biotar 58mm f2. One of the most widely available copies thereof is the Helios 44 series, which despite the name are 58mm f2 lenses. Shown here is the 44M model. I got mine for like 50 euros, a far cry from the 300 plus that the 75mm will set you back. Obviously not the same focal length or aperture, but if it's swirly bokeh you're after, it's not a bad alternative. It's a low contrast lens and a bit soft wide open, but it has plenty of character. If you're a collector, this lens is a no-brainer. On the autofocus front, you don't really have much choice if 75mm is your thing, for whatever reason. The highly reviewed Samyang 75mm f1.8 is at least 50% more expensive, without being 50% better. First-party lenses close to 75mm but not quite 75, like the Sony 85mm f1.8, are anywhere between double and triple the price. The Samyang and Sony don't have an aperture ring, which the TTArtisan does. And despite its silly hood shenanigans, its affordable price makes it the value king in this segment, in my opinion. On the manual front, we have some wildly varying prices. If you're comfortable spending more than 800 euros, you know what to do. Otherwise, if you're more budget conscious, the f1.5 has okay value for money. And I say okay because image quality at f1.5 is kind of a joke. If 58mm f2 also rocks your boat, you can't go wrong with a Helios f2 from the used lens market at a third of the price or less. Don't forget that you will need an m42 adapter for your camera of choice as well. I tend to use K&F adapters as they are pretty value for money. If somehow you are torn between them, I'd say, if swirly bokeh is your passion, give the f1.5 a chance. Otherwise, for a more all-around performer, the f2 is a no-brainer. While I'm tempted to deduct points for the terrible hood ergonomics, there's no denying the f2 is a solid performer for a great price. Hence, I'm rating it as solid. As for the f1.5, I admire TTArtisan's courage to release something different in 2024, even though it's based on a well-known recipe. If you don't care about swirly bokeh, it's a definite pass, but if you appreciate it, despite its serious flaws, I'd rate it as not bad and definitely worth a look. Just remember to stop it down to f2 or more if you want any kind of image quality. That's it, I'm done. Subscribe!
Do it.